All right. So just a quick review of things that we have coming up, what we're going to be doing today, where we see ourselves moving into next week. Number one, you completed your chapter 1 quiz, and I have graded all of those. So you can go into Moodle and you would be able to see the grade for the entire quiz. But then I also sent back the Excel spreadsheet that you submitted for the final question, right, where you completed the accounting equation. So I sent those via email. And if there was anything that was incorrect in your Excel problem, I have red font comments in the Excel spreadsheets. So if you did anything incorrectly, I have noted it with red writing in that Excel spreadsheet. If you have any questions about that, please make sure that you let me know. If there was anything like missteps taken in the first question that you just typed your answers into Moodle, I put those comments right in Moodle. So when I was grading the quiz, I put those comments right in Moodle. So you should be able to see your score. You should be able to see my comments. If you have any questions about any of that, please reach out and let me know. What I will typically do is after the chapter 2 quiz, I will go ahead and maybe reach out to students where it seems like they struggled with both of those chapter quizzes, because as I've been saying all, since we met the first day, these first few chapters serve as the foundation of literally everything else that we talk about, right? So understanding the accounting equation, which is what, by the way? Assets equals liabilities plus equity. And we know, oh, I just inhaled that. All right. And we know assets equals liabilities plus equity, that there are 4 different components that are built into equity. And they are common stock, revenue, dividends, expenses. And what effect do common stock and revenue always have on the accounting equation? Always positive. What about expenses and dividends? Always negative. And then we learn, and then not as prepared as I thought I was, y'all. And then we learned in chapter 2 that it's not just good enough to know, right, whether we have, what type of account we have, where it fits in the accounting equation, and is it increasing or decreasing. We added a 4th question. And that 4th question was how we turn this business transaction into the language of accounting, with debits on the left, credits on the right in our journal, right? We said if we want to increase an asset, we do so with a debit, which means if we want to decrease the asset, we do the opposite with a credit. If we want to increase a liability, we do so with a credit, which again means the opposite. If we want to decrease a liability, we do so with a debit. And then finally, if we want to increase our equity, we do so with a credit, which means if we want to decrease our equity, we go ahead and do that with a debit. So I went off on a real far tangent, but I'm coming back. What I was saying was after the chapter 2 quiz, which again is testing your understanding, not only of the accounting equation like chapter 1 did, but also about how to interpret debits and credits for these business transactions like we did in class on Wednesday. That chapter 2 quiz is going to ask you to do that. And so usually after the chapter 2 quiz, if I see that students have struggled with both chapter 1 and chapter 2, I'll typically reach out with a message. Hey, I see that you really struggled, and we know that if you're struggling here, it's going to continue, because everything that we do is going to be analyzing business transactions and being able to make entries in our journal for them based on these debits and credits. Okay. I will reach out to you individually via email and say, hey, what can I do? There's tutoring that you can sign up for. There's a tutor for this class if you were interested in learning about that. If you wanted to meet with me outside of class one-on-one, I'm happy to do that. If you're working with a small group of students and the small group of you would like to meet with me after class once a week, cool. I'll do whatever you need as far as supporting you in order to make sure that this stuff makes sense moving forward. Okay. Now, the timing of that, right? Chapter 2, we're finishing today. Your SMART book was due on Wednesday. Your Connect homework is going to be due on Monday. Yes? On Monday, what we will do is a brand new example problem of chapter 2. So we will walk our way through business transactions and putting them in our journal and updating our T accounts. We'll do it all over again with a new problem. That way, you'll have a bunch of different examples to look at when you go to prepare for that quiz that you will take by class time on Wednesday. Okay? Yes, please. By class time. Yes, by class time. And actually, now that we're talking about this, because we don't have class on Wednesday, right? Because Wednesday, all right, let's get this straight. Wednesday is the ethics teach-in. So we don't have class on Wednesday, but I still want that quiz to be done so that when we see each other on Friday, we're ready to move on to chapter 3. But what I will do is I will make that quiz due by midnight on Wednesday rather than class time on Wednesday. That makes a little bit more sense since we're not meeting for class. Okay. So again, we finish up chapter 2 lecture today. We do additional examples on Monday. The whole class is going to be additional examples, getting us ready for chapter 2. And then you'll have until Wednesday at midnight to complete that chapter 2 quiz. And I will go over with you just like I did chapter 1. There were no surprises in chapter 1 quiz, right? I told you there was going to be questions. I told you exactly what was going to be on them. I'll do the same thing for chapter 2. Okay. All righty. So what I want to do is continue where we left off in chapter 2. You will notice that I have an updated chapter 2 spreadsheet, right? Because at the end of class on Wednesday, we had finished making entries in our journal for the entire month of April for that problem that was built into the PowerPoint presentation, right? We had finished making all of our entries, but what I had screwed up on is I didn't update my T accounts for each of those entries that we made in our journal. So remember, the process that we're going through is first, create a log of all of the transactions that happened during the month, and then transfer that same information into our ledgers or our T accounts. That way we can tell what happened to each individual account during the month of April, okay? So this spreadsheet up to this point is available for you in Moodle. If you are following along, this is what your T accounts should look like, okay? So if you are following along, making the entries in the journal and updating your T accounts, this is what your T accounts should look like. Now, we are ready to move on to the next phase of this process, which is to prepare and analyze what's called a trial balance. A trial balance, okay? Before we move to this next phase of the accounting process, does anybody have any questions with the transactions that we did on Wednesday? Does anybody have any questions about the T accounts, the ledgers that we used when we were updating after every entry made in our journal? Any questions before we move on to the next phase of the process? Okay. A trial balance is very simply a list of every account that we used during the period of time, the month of April, in the example that we went through, and what its balance is at the end of the month. A trial balance is just a list of every account that we use during that month and what its balance is at the end of the month. Okay, and so the way that we are going to build a trial balance is by following these 3 steps. Number 1, we're going to list each account that we used. Okay, now that in your Excel spreadsheet has already been done for you. So we use the journal tab, right? And then we updated all of those entries into our T accounts. The next tab over that's labeled worksheet, and in parentheses, it says TB. TB stands for trial balance. This is the worksheet that we will use to prepare our trial balance. And you should see those account names on yours. Do you see those account names on yours? What? Yes. Anybody else want to confirm that? Do you see those account names on your trial balance? Okay, just wanting to make sure that everybody sees it. So that's the first step, is to just list out in our trial balance, what accounts did we use this month? Here they all are, okay? Now, do you see that they're in any particular order on my trial balance spreadsheet? Or are they just randomly put in there, Ashanti? Yep. And then what comes next? And then what comes next? Liabilities. And then what comes next? The components of equity. We prepare our trial balance the same way that we understand our accounting equation. We list all of our assets first, then we list our liabilities, then we list the components of equity. The reason we do it in this order is because it's going to help us then prepare the financial statements that we have to make, okay? So this step that we're doing right here, preparing the trial balance, is leading us to those financial statements. We're going to make today an income statement, a statement of retained earnings, and a balance sheet. And the only way that we can do that is by first making a trial balance, okay? So each step in this process is leading us to the ultimate goal of making financial statements, right? Because accounting is a system that identifies, records, and communicates information that's relevant, reliable, and comparable. The information that we're trying to communicate is going to be these financial statements, and we're going to make them today together. Okay? So step one in the trial balance phase of this process is list out all the accounts. Now, if you make a trial balance and it's not in the order of the accounting equation, that's okay. As long as all of the accounts are listed, and eventually I'm going to show you, we're going to put the balances in those accounts. As long as they're all listed and their balances are correct, that's okay. But my recommendation to you is to put it in this order, in the order of the accounting equation, because it's going to make it easier for you when you go to make those financial statements. Because if all the assets are organized together, then you could just copy and paste them all over into your financial statement. If all the expenses are all grouped together, you can just take them and copy and paste them over into your financial statement template, okay? It just makes it easier, but do you have to do it? No. Okay, so that's step one, list the accounts. Step two, compute the total debit balances and total credit balances. So what step two is telling us is now we have to figure out what's the balance of cash, what's the balance of accounts receivable, what's the balance of prepaid insurance, and so on and so forth. We have to put the ending balance of each of these accounts into columns B or C, right? Whether it's a debit balance or a credit balance, okay? How we're going to do that is through the use of the T accounts, okay? So let's talk about cash for a minute. You can see cash was the most used account. It has the most numbers in its ledger, right? That means we used it more often than the other. We have 3 debits on the left-hand side of our cash T account, and we have 5 credits on the right-hand side of our cash T account. And that information should help us determine what is the ending balance of cash at the end of April. How can I figure out what the ending balance of cash is at the end of April? What should I do? Isaac? Go ahead. Find the sum. I'm going to find the sum, this little summation key. Yours looks probably different on your iPad, or it's placed somewhere else. But you see this little sigma sign here? That's going to be your friend, because that tells Excel you want to add some stuff up. So I click that sum, and Excel even does the work. Excel's like, you want me to add this? And I'm like, yeah, I want you to add that. So I hit return or enter on my keyboard. The sum of the debit side of my cash T account is $103,080. Did y'all get that? Okay. So watch me again. On the credit side, let's do the same thing, right? I'm going to use that little summation formula. If I click on that little tool, Excel says, you want me to add this? And I say, yeah, I do. Add that up for me, right? And Excel says that the credit side is $33,780. So Isaac said, figure out the sums of the debit side and the credit side. So I have $103,080 on the debit side. Those were increases to cash, right? Because cash is an asset, so debits are increases. And then I had $33,780 on the credit side. Those were my decreases to cash. Because cash is an asset, and if it's on the credit side, those were decreases. Are y'all with me? So now, how do I figure out how much cash I have at the end of April? Michaela. Debit minus credit. So what I'm going to do, again, using formulas in Excel, it's good to get used to using formulas in Excel. They will be helpful to you. Plus or equals, and then I'm going to say my debits are $103,080 minus my credits, which are $33,780. If I hit enter or return, the ending balance of cash at the end of April is $69,300. Anybody want me to do the formula again? So I have the sum of the debit side, right? And the sum of the credit side. And in order to figure out what the ending balance of cash is, bless you, on your keyboard, you'll hit equals or plus, either one, and tap on the debit total, $103,080, plus, I lied, minus, because I want to figure out the difference between the two, minus the $33,780 credit side. So the debit side minus the credit side gives me the ending balance, okay? So cash is an asset, and assets normally have a debit ending balance, right? Because if that cash asset had a credit ending balance, that means we would have negative cash. Now, in the real world, can that happen? Yeah, and that means your business isn't doing so well, right? But in the bubble of this classroom, that's not going to happen. Your assets are going to have debit balances. Your liabilities are going to have credit balances, okay? And then depending on which component of equity it is, right? Common stock and revenue are going to have credit balances because they always increase equity. And expenses and dividends are always going to have debit balances because they always decrease equity, okay? So I need to do that exact same thing for every one of the accounts that I have in my T account. That way I know what is the ending balance for every single account that I have used during this month. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes and perform the same thing that we just did for cash. But I want to bring to your attention, do you have to do anything for prepaid insurance, dividends, utilities expense, prepaid rent? No. And I mentioned to you before, I like to color code things. When I know what the ending balance is, I'm going to highlight it in yellow. So for those accounts where you only made one entry, that's the balance. You don't have to do any math, okay? So prepaid insurance, dividends, utilities expense, prepaid rent, and common stock. Their one entry represents the ending balance. Only one thing happened to that account, okay? So again, take a couple minutes, go through and calculate the ending balance of the other accounts. And I'm going to do the same so that you can compare your answers to mine, okay? If you have questions as you're spending a couple of minutes doing this, ask me. because I'm doing this quickly so that you have something to look at and compare to. Oops, I forgot one. And I'll leave this up for another minute or two. Having trouble with the formulas, using Excel, figuring out how I got my balances, raise your hand. And I will, or use each other as a resource also. So what we are trying to accomplish here is to figure out at the end of the month, what do we have in each of these accounts that we used? Right? Our business had a bunch of economic events, a bunch of transactions, and we're essentially trying to now summarize those transactions, right? We went through the details in our journal and in updating our T account, and now we're moving on to the phase of the process where we just want a summary, right? When you think about, right, in chapter 1, we talked about who uses financial statements. We said the IRS, right? Customers, suppliers, the internal users, different managers. Typically, users don't want to see those journal entries. They need to see a summary of transactions, right? They don't want to see every day what were the transactions that the business had. They want to see a summary at the end of the month, maybe, and it could just be at the end of the week, right? What happened? Where are our balances in each of the accounts that we used? Okay. So, anybody have any questions before we move on? So we use these T accounts, these ledgers, to help us figure out what is the balance in each account at the end of the month. And then we put those balances into our trial balance, okay? So all you're again doing is transferring information from one spreadsheet to the other. So for cash, I know cash is gonna have that debit balance. So I'm just gonna transfer the amount that I had in cash over in my T account into my trial balance workbook. That's all I'm doing, okay? So again, go ahead and spend a couple of minutes getting your T account information over to your trial balance and make sure that you're transferring it into the right column. Is it a debit balance or is it a credit balance? Again, you do that. I'm going to do it quickly so that you have something to compare it to as you work through updating your spreadsheet. This is a simple exercise of transferring information from one spreadsheet to the next. That's it. And I'm using the tool that Excel provides that sort of attaches one spreadsheet to the other. You don't have to do that. You can type the numbers in if you would prefer, right? So instead of attaching the spreadsheet to my T accounts, I could just type in 3040. Either way, it doesn't matter, however you would prefer to do it. when you are done, this is what your trial balance should look like. Then all we're doing is transferring the information from the key account tab to the worksheet trial balance tab. As you're doing so, in chapter 2, we're just focused on the first set of columns, the trial balance. In chapter 3, we're going to actually put stuff in the other columns of our worksheet here. We're going to put adjustments in. We're going to come up with our final balances. But for now, we're just worried about that first set of columns, trial balance. Our assets should all have debit balances. Liabilities should have credit balances. Common stock and revenue should have credit balances. Expenses and dividends should have debit balance. Okay.
A quick question.
Yes, please.
Can I see your details?
Yeah. Logan, tell me when you're done because I want to put it, you're good? Okay, I want to put it back over. Anybody else need help when it comes to the trial balance? Again, I'm just giving, there's a few people still kind of punching on their keyboard, so I'm just making sure everybody has enough time to update this. Bless you. We good? Any questions? Anybody need another minute? Okay. So what we just did was step 2. Step 1 was put all the account names into the trial balance template. Step 2 was make sure that each account that's listed has either a debit or a credit balance. Again, depending on what type of account it is, some will have the debit balance, some will have the credit balance. That was step 2. Step 3 is to make sure we didn't make any mistakes. Let's make sure, let's check that all of our debits equal all of our credits, right? Because that was the same thing as us saying, does our accounting equation balance in chapter 1? Now what we say is, do we have the same number of debits as we do credits? So in my Excel spreadsheet, again, I'm going to use that little summation tool, right? So that Excel knows I want it to add up some stuff. So I tap or click on that summation tool and Excel says, you want me to add this? And I say, no, because I need Excel to add the whole thing, right? So I highlight the entire column. Okay. So again, I'm going to do that one more time. I want to add up the entire column of information in column B. So I tap on that summation and Excel automatically says, do you want me to add just this stuff? Because Excel sees these blank spaces here and thinks, oh, she probably doesn't want to include those. But I do, because I want the whole column. So I'm going to take my cursor, click on the top, and then drag it all the way down. Okay. And that gives me the sum of the entire column of debits. Anybody want extra help with that? Do the same thing with the credit column, right? I want to use that summation tool. Excel says, do you want me to add this stuff? I say, yeah, but to be safe, I like to highlight the whole column. Because what if I change something, right? What if another credit pops up over there? I wanted to add the whole column. So I usually change what Excel initially put and I highlight the whole thing. Do my debits equal my credits? Yes, they do. That's good. That's what we need. We need our debits to equal our credits. That shows us that the transactions are balancing out. Okay. If your debits don't equal your credits, what do? Right? First, go back and see if you simply made an error in transferring the number from one spreadsheet to the next, right? If it was 2,600, did you put 6,200? You're human, right? We're all human. We can make those kinds of mistakes very easily, especially when we're just getting used to working in a tool like Excel. Okay, so go back through and make sure that it wasn't just some sort of transposition error in moving the numbers from one spreadsheet to the next. Okay, if you check all of that, right, then you may need to go back into your T accounts and say, okay, did I add my T accounts properly, right? I added up all my debits, I added up all my credits, and then I subtracted the two. Did I do that correctly for each individual account? Okay, if that is still correct, then you need to go back into your journal, right? You kind of just backtrack through the process to see where the error may have occurred. You go back to your journal and say, okay, in my journal, did I put the debit and credit in the right place? Was that correct, right? Did I put the numbers in correctly in each of the journal transactions? You kind of just backtrack through and you do the more detailed work at the end. Try to figure out if it's something simple first, okay? Anybody have any questions? The last step, I shouldn't say the last step, because as I mentioned in chapter 3, we're actually going to make adjustments to our accounting records. So that takes on a whole nother set of steps that we'll get to in chapter 3 next week. For our purposes in chapter 2, the final phase of this is going to be to use that trial balance to make the financial statements. You'll see, and you'll remember from chapter 1, that there are 4 financial statements, but we are only going to make 3 of them. The 4 financial statements are the income statement, the statement of retained earnings, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flows. The one that we are leaving out is the statement of cash flows because it's a little bit more complex to prepare. Now, we're going to talk about it in future chapters. You're just not going to make one yourself. Does that make sense? So, based on this slide, I want you, again, pair up or work with a couple people around you. I want you to use your trial balance. Here is the trial balance to create the income statement, the statement of retained earnings, and the balance sheet on this next tab. So you'll see that I have headings for you already. Here's the income statement. In the middle is the statement of retained earnings, and on the right side is the balance sheet. I already gave them headings for you. What I want you to do is use your trial balance data to make these financial statements, okay? And again, use the PowerPoint slide. I'll leave this PowerPoint slide up as a resource so that you know what are you supposed to put in your income statement? What are you supposed to put in your statement of retained earnings? What are you supposed to put in your balance? Okay, so group together, work together for the next 10 minutes, and then I'm going to see what you came up with. And we're going to prepare the final financial statements together as a class so that everybody understands. Okay, so go ahead and get started. Raise your hand if you have questions about where something needs to go. Okay, raise your hand, but go ahead and get to work.
That's fine. That's what. That's how it is in Acton, though. Or they when they then they get probably Acton University of Acton. That's right. The income statement. Income statement. Before. Don't make no sense.
In the morning, Saturday morning,
Yeah. Exactly.
we should do that. Like Saturday morning, everybody knows.
Oh,
Everybody just a little bit.
so another 2 or 3 minutes to work on this. Again, it's not meant to be like a race, just to give you a chance to kind of think about it independently, and then we're gonna come back and go through the whole thing together, so that everybody is on the same page.
But yeah, surprised ain't nobody got pulled. I'm glad. Shit. Oh, for sure. Not hype. You can do it. Oh, I like how it's- Oh, shit. I mean, yeah, but niggas after the park. I can play O-line. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's not that. Yeah, right, babe. I did that. I forgot. I did that like right before the class. I seen them. Yeah, so. Financial accounting. I think that's like.
I got it.
Okay, let's go through this together. Like I said, not meant to, if you didn't finish it, totally fine. The whole point was just to get you kind of thinking about it on your own before we do it together. So we make these financial statements in a particular order, right? They're not listed here just because that's the way the textbook publisher decided to list them. They are listed in a particular order because you must make them in this order. They link to one another. So you cannot make the balance sheet unless you have made the statement of retained earnings. You cannot make the statement of retained earnings unless you made the income statement. The income statement is number one. Got to go first. Okay. As the slide says, right, our income statement is going to be our revenues less our expenses for the period of time. So using our trial balance, what am I going to take from my trial balance that's going to go into my income statement? Service revenue and what else, Donovan? Utilities expense. So in my income statement, I'm going to have service revenue and I'm going to subtract utilities expense. Now, obviously, in future examples and in the real world, there's going to be more than just one expense in the trial balance, right? There's going to be multiple expenses that they would have. If you are preparing an income statement, all you have to do is list all of the expenses together. That's it. So if you had utilities expense and rent expense and salaries expense and maybe insurance expense, you would just list them all individually in your income statement. And then you would take all of them and subtract them from your revenue. So again, I'm going to do a quick formula: plus revenue minus expenses. And this gives me what we're going to call net income. Net income is how much of your revenues have exceeded your expenses during the given month of time. Again, the month of April for us. Okay. Any questions on the income statement? Okay. Now, in these upcoming quizzes, you're going to be asked to create financial statements. Specifically, Chapter 2 quiz, you're going to be asked to make an income statement. Okay. And in that question, it's going to give you all of the revenues and expenses. And what you just have to do is use the Excel template to prepare it in this way with a heading, list all of the revenues, subtract all of the expenses, and show your net income. Let me blow that up a little bit too. It's, oh God, a little bit too big, a little bit too big. There we go. Okay. I can't stress this enough, on the quiz, on the midterm, I'm going to give you a template that has these three areas, right? Or it has one area that, again, for the quiz, you just have to make an income statement. You don't have to do all three. I am not going to give you a heading. This is the heading that you need to include in your income statement, every heading for every financial statement should include the company name, the period of time, and what statement it is. Okay, so in the problem, I will tell you what the company name is. I will tell you what month you are creating the statement for, and I will tell you which financial statement I want you to do. Again, for chapter 2, it's going to be the income statement. Make sure you put a heading at the top of your financial statements. You will get points off if you don't. We clear on that? Okay, so that's our income statement. After the income statement, we can move on to the statement of retained earnings. The statement of retained earnings reports how much of our earnings have we kept within our business this period of time. Okay. Normally, the statement of retained earnings will begin with a beginning balance. What's the beginning balance of retained earnings if this is the first month we've ever done business? Skylar, 0, right? If this is the first month we've ever done business, do we have any earnings that we've retained? No, we just opened, right? So retained earnings, the beginning balance, is simply going to be 0, okay? And what we include in our statement of retained earnings are the earnings that we've had this month, our net income. Where do we get the net income from? Joe, I saw you pointing. Over there, the income statement, right? We get our net income from the income statement, 11,540. And we subtract out any dividends that we have paid to our investors, because those are not earnings that we're retaining anymore. Those are earnings that we've distributed to our investors, right? So we want to know what earnings have we retained. So we subtract out those dividends. And where do you find the dividends? On the trial balance, right? They're over on the trial balance. So I'm going to take my worksheet tab and grab the $6,200 of dividends that I already accounted for in my trial balance. If I take the beginning balance of retained earnings, which in this case was 0, plus my net income, minus what I distributed to investors, because I'm not retaining that anymore, I gave it to the investors, that gives me my ending retained earnings, 5,340. I'm going to do that formula again in 1 second, okay? But I want to ask you a question first. My ending retained earnings for the month of April is 5,340. What's my beginning retained earnings for the month of May? 5,340. What I end with in April is what I start with in May. What I end with in May is what I will start with in June, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? So my ending balance here in April is what I will start with. It will be my beginning balance when I go to make these statements in May. Okay. So now let me do that formula one more time so that if you're, again, new to Excel, I am going to take plus or equals the beginning balance, which was 0, right? I'm going to add plus my net income that I earned this month of April, and I'm going to subtract minus the dividends that I paid, those earnings that are now distributed to my investors. And if I hit enter or return, it gives me my ending retained earnings balance, 5,340. Any questions on that? Yes, I can. Plus or equals. I tap on my beginning balance, which was 0, plus my net income balance. I tap on that cell, 11,540, minus my dividends. I tap on the 6,200. So 0 plus 11,540 minus 6,200. And then if I hit enter or return on my keyboard, if your Excel is still not working out, that's okay. Let's stick around for a couple minutes at the end of class. I'll see where things may be bless you, where things may be off, okay? I'll work with you individually. So 2 down, 1 to go. The last statement that you're going to prepare, again, we'll talk about the statement of cash flows. We're not going to leave it out completely. But the last statement that you have to prepare is the balance sheet, okay? And the balance sheet is going to be a summary of our assets, our liabilities, and again, our summary of equity, okay? So over here on the right-hand side is my balance sheet. And I'm going to start with all of my assets. Which accounts are my assets on my trial balance? Which ones? Cash, accounts receivable, all the way to what? All the way down to office equipment. So prepaid insurance, prepaid rent, office supplies, office equipment, all assets, right? You can type them in to your Excel spreadsheet, or you can highlight them, tap. No, you won't be able to tap, huh? Well, for time purposes, I'll figure out how to do it on your iPads. For my purposes with a mouse, I can right click and hit copy and then paste. And there they are. I'll figure out how to do it on the iPad and I can show you at another time. Okay. I want all of my amounts to come over too. Let's see if this works. Yep. I want all of my amounts to come over too. Okay. So I have my cash, my accounts receivable, prepaid insurance, prepaid rent, office supplies, and office equipment. My total assets. I don't know why that just happened. My total assets is just going to be the sum of all of those things, right? If I add them all up together using that summation formula, my total assets are 123,900. What should my liabilities plus my equity end up being? Same thing, right? Because our balance sheet is our accounting equation and it needs to balance. So first I bring over all of my assets. Then I'm going to bring over my liabilities. In this case, we only had one, right? If I go over to my worksheet, the one liability that I had was accounts payable. So I'm going to type that into my Excel spreadsheet and I'm going to bring over the amount of $760. That's my one liability. Now, here is where students oftentimes trip up when it comes to making a balance sheet, right? Because we said the balance sheet is the accounting equation. So you think to yourself, oh, all right, well, if I have all my assets and my liabilities, then I'm going to list all this stuff in there too. Common stock, revenues, expense. Don't do that. Because each account should only appear on one statement. So we already put dividends on the statement of retained earnings. It's not going to go on the balance sheet too. We already put revenues and expenses on the income statement. It's not going to go on the balance sheet too. What we're going to do in our equity section, equity, is include common stock, because that hasn't been put anywhere yet, right? We didn't put common stock on the income statement or the statement of retained earnings. So common stock is going to go on my balance sheet. I'm going to bring that balance over, right? 117,800. I'm going to bring that amount over from my trial balance to my financial statements, common stock. I'm not going to put all my revenues again. I already put them on the income statement. I'm not going to put all my expenses again. I already put those on the income statement. I'm not even going to put dividends in there because I already put them on the statement of retained earnings. What I'm going to do is include my ending retained earnings, the 5,340. The retained earnings statement links to the balance sheet in this equity section, right? Because that retained earnings statement included all of the net income that we generated, revenues minus expenses, and it subtracted the dividends out for us. So this ending retained earnings balance that I'm going to put into my equity section is essentially a summary of revenues minus expenses minus dividends. We already put them on other statements, so now I just want to put that one figure, ending retained earnings, because that one figure is summarizing revenues minus expenses minus dividends. That one number is summarizing for me my revenues minus my expenses minus my dividends. Ending retained earnings. If I add plus liabilities plus common stock plus ending retained earnings, so I'm just adding them all together, I should get $123,900, which means my accounting equation balances. My assets equal my liabilities plus my equity. Okay, I'm going to do that formula again one more time. If I want to add my liabilities and my equity accounts, I will put equals or plus into Excel, tap on the 760, that's the liability, plus the 117,800, that's my common stock, plus the 5,340 that came over from my statement of retained earnings that represents ending retained earnings. And if I hit enter or return, I should get 123,900 because that's my asset balance as well. Bless you. Okay. What do you think? Does anybody have any questions? On the chapter 2 quiz, the only statement I'm going to ask you to make is the income statement. But on the chapter 3 quiz, I'm going to ask you to make a balance sheet. And on the midterm exam, I'm going to ask you to make all of them. Okay. So we're going to practice it again. We're going to do it all over again. We're going to do the entries in the journal. We're going to update the T accounts. We're going to make a trial balance. We're going to do the whole thing all over again with a brand new problem on Monday. Okay. So you have this that we just went through in class. You'll have another example that we go through on Monday. I mentioned in my lecture that there is a demonstration problem, and I know we have 2 slides left, but I'll do those on Monday as well. I mentioned in my lecture problem that there is another demonstration on page 53 of your textbook, chapter 2, and I recorded myself going through another example that you can watch on your own if you want to. So there's like 4 different examples that you can look at and practice with in order to understand this process of making journals, updating your T account. Now, this particular video focuses on the journals. It focuses on, here's our business transactions. How do I make entries in my journal for that? Okay. But the other examples go through the whole process up to making the financial statements. And we'll do it all again together on Tuesday or Monday, right? So on Monday, I'll finish those last couple of PowerPoint slides. I will present the problem to you, and then you'll have a good 20, 25 minutes to just work with each other, working your way through those journals, putting the entries, or working your way through those transactions, putting the entries in your journal, updating your T account, so on and so forth, while I kind of pace myself around and answer all of your questions, okay? Please don't forget that your Connect homework for chapter 2 is due on Monday, and I will move the deadline for the chapter 2 quiz. I will move it to Wednesday at midnight. Okay? Everybody cool? Okay, I appreciate you, and I will see you on Monday. If you have questions over the weekend, shoot me an email. I'm always available.